Welcome to Value Gold, where we share powerful stories of transformation and spiritual growth. Today, we will dive into an inspiring journey of overcoming addiction, not just a battle with substances, but a fight against the very forces that undermine our peace of mind. This journey is a profound exploration of the mind, heart, and spirit. And it's a story that holds powerful lessons for all of us. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future stories and insights that can help you unlock your true potential. This story is divided into 5 parts, each one uncovering deeper layers of personal growth. And by the end, you'll understand how to face your own challenges with clarity and peace. Part 1: The Dark Nights of Temptation. The first whispers of temptation always seem so small, so harmless. It starts as a fleeting thought. A tiny itch in the back of the mind: what's one more drink? One more hit? Just to feel good again. Just for a moment. But that seemingly innocent moment is where it all begins. The moment of indulgence may seem like a simple release, a quick escape from the overwhelming pressures of life. But it's also the first step into a cycle that's hard to break. In this opening chapter of our journey, we enter the world of David, a man who once had it all. He was successful in his career, respected by his peers, and surrounded by a loving family. On the surface, he was the epitome of success. But underneath that polished exterior, there was a storm brewing, a deep, unacknowledged emptiness that he couldn't shake. The pressures of daily life, the constant demands of work, the weight of expectations, these were the things that kept him up at night. At first, David didn't turn to addiction out of a conscious desire to escape. It wasn't that he was actively seeking a way to destroy himself. It started innocently enough, with a drink after work to unwind, a cigarette to calm his nerves, or a casual joint to relax his mind. But these small indulgences slowly grew. They became his escape, his way of finding peace in a world that was growing increasingly chaotic. Every drink, every puff, felt like a temporary solution to the deep well of anxiety that he never truly confronted. And with each passing day, he relied on them more and more. As David's dependency grew, so did the internal conflict. Part of him knew that something wasn't right. He could feel the addictive pull tightening its grip on him. And yet he couldn't bring himself to stop. The relief was too sweet, the calm too soothing. But as we know from both psychological science and Buddhist teachings, true peace cannot be found in external things. The more David sought solace outside himself, the further he drifted from his true nature. The sense of calm he experienced was fleeting, just like the high of a drug that eventually fades into the emptiness it once filled. This is where the Buddhist concept of dukkha, or suffering, begins to come into play. Buddhism teaches us that suffering arises from our attachment to transient things, the things that can never provide lasting peace. David, like many of us, was attached to the temporary relief his addictions gave him. Each drink, each high, was an illusion, a brief moment of escape from the reality of his life. And yet, no matter how many times he indulged, he woke up the next day with the same emptiness, the same gnawing feeling that nothing was truly fulfilling. This is the paradox of addiction: the more we seek solace in something external, the more we spiral into despair. David's addiction wasn't just about the substances, it was about the desperate craving for peace. A craving he was trying to satisfy through external means. It's like trying to fill a bottomless pit with water. No matter how much he drank, how much he smoked, it never seemed enough. Psychologically, addiction is often rooted in unresolved emotional pain. An attempt to numb or escape from feelings of inadequacy, shame, or fear. David's addiction was his way of coping with a deep sense of insecurity. A fear of facing the chaos inside himself. It was easier to drink, to escape, than to confront the true source of his pain. This is where we see the intersection of psychology and Buddhism. Psychology teaches us that addiction is often an attempt to self-soothe, to regulate emotions, while Buddhism teaches that true healing comes from facing our suffering, not avoiding it. But at this point, David hadn't yet understood that. He was trapped in a cycle of craving and aversion, clinging to the temporary relief while avoiding the deeper work of healing. He could see that his life was slowly falling apart. His relationships were strained. His health was deteriorating. And his work performance was suffering. But he couldn't stop. The grip of addiction was too powerful. This part of the story, these dark nights of temptation, is often the hardest phase for anyone struggling with addiction. It's the moment when you know something is wrong but can't seem to break free. It's the place where you feel lost, hopeless, and disconnected. It's easy to see only the darkness, to believe that there is no way out. But this is where the power of self-awareness and mindfulness can begin to shift things. David hadn't yet embraced this. But the seed was beginning to grow. As we pause in David's journey, it's important to recognize that the dark nights of temptation aren't just a story for those struggling with addiction to substances. We all experience moments in life when we seek comfort in things that ultimately don't serve us, whether it's food, entertainment, or even the pursuit of success. These are all forms of attachment. The same attachment that leads to suffering. But just as in David's story, these dark nights also contain the seeds of awakening. The key to overcoming them lies in our ability to turn inward, to confront the underlying pain, and to seek peace not in external distractions but in the quiet stillness of our own hearts. Before we continue to the next part of this journey, I want to encourage you to take a moment and reflect on your own life. Are there any areas where you might be seeking comfort or escape in ways that don't truly serve your well-being? Are there attachments that are keeping you stuck in a cycle of suffering? And remember, if you're finding this story valuable, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Value Gold. We'll be continuing this powerful journey in the next chapter, where we begin to explore the deeper wounds that lead to addiction and how we can begin to heal them. Don't miss it. Part 2, The Wounds of the Soul. The journey into the depths of addiction is not merely a physical one. It is an exploration of the soul. A confrontation with the wounds we've carried for years, perhaps without even realizing it. For David, his addiction was not just about the substances, it was about the pain that he had been running from. The darkness that he had buried deep within. What many of us fail to understand is that addiction, at its core, is a form of self-medication, a desperate attempt to numb the very wounds that make us feel broken. David had always been taught to be strong, to hide his vulnerability. In his family, showing weakness was frowned upon. And emotions were something to be controlled, not expressed. But emotions don't simply disappear because we suppress them, they simmer beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. For years, David had been living with a quiet sadness. A feeling that something was missing in his life. It wasn't something he could easily name, just a general sense of unfulfillment. As though he were always running on empty. His childhood had been marked by high expectations, constant striving, and the pressure to succeed. His parents loved him. Yes. But their love was often conditional, based on his achievements, his ability to meet their standards. They never asked him about his feelings. They never noticed when he was struggling. In a way, David had learned to measure his worth by what he could do, not by who he was. And so, when he hit his first real roadblock in adulthood, The pressure became unbearable. This is where the Buddhist teaching on dukkha, or suffering, becomes deeply relevant. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from attachment, not just to physical things, but to expectations, to identities we've created, and to the stories we tell ourselves about who we should be. David's suffering wasn't just caused by external circumstances, it was deeply connected to his attachment to an idealized self, one that was always strong, always in control, and always succeeding. But this false self, this mask, was fragile. And when life's challenges came crashing in, it cracked wide open. Underneath was the raw, unhealed wound, the fear of being unworthy, the anxiety of not being good enough, the sadness of never truly being seen or heard. Psychologically, addiction often develops as a coping mechanism for these deep-seated emotional wounds. David didn't know how to deal with his pain. So he turned to alcohol and drugs to numb it, to escape the gnawing emptiness that felt too heavy to face. He didn't know it yet, but his addiction was the result of a lifetime of unprocessed grief, unspoken fears, and unmet emotional needs. This is where David's story starts to shift, even if ever so slightly. One night, after a particularly heavy binge, he woke up feeling worse than he ever had. His body ached. His mind was clouded. And the shame he felt was suffocating. But it wasn't just physical pain he was dealing with. The emotional weight was unbearable. And for the first time, David allowed himself to stop running. In that moment of stillness, he began to face the truth. It was almost as if the addiction itself had cracked open a door that had been closed for so long, and for the first time in years. He allowed himself to see what was inside. The sadness, the fear, the longing for approval, the belief that he wasn't enough. These were the wounds he had been carrying for as long as he could remember. And in that quiet moment, David realized something profound: the addiction wasn't the problem. It was merely a symptom of a much deeper wound. Buddhism teaches us the importance of mindfulness, of becoming present with our thoughts, emotions, and sensations without judgment. It's in this space of awareness that healing begins. For David, this was the first step. He didn't yet have the tools to heal, but he had started to notice his pain. He had started to see the ways in which his mind had been running, seeking refuge in substances, always avoiding the discomfort of facing his true self. Psychologically, this is an important moment in the recovery process. It's called awareness, the ability to recognize the triggers and patterns that feed the addiction. For many people, addiction is about avoidance, about keeping the pain at bay. But recovery starts with the willingness to face that pain head-on, to sit with the discomfort, and to acknowledge it as part of the journey. As David's awareness deepened, he began to explore ways to address the pain that had haunted him for so long. He didn't yet know the path he would take. But for the first time, he understood that healing wasn't about numbing the pain, it was about embracing it. In this way, his journey became both a psychological and spiritual awakening. He didn't need to fix himself, he needed to heal. He didn't need to run away, he needed to face the darkness and allow the light of mindfulness to shine on it. This is where we see the intersection of psychology and Buddhism in the process of healing. Both traditions emphasize the importance of self-awareness, self-compassion, and non-attachment. Buddhism teaches that we are not our emotions or our addictions, we are the awareness that observes them. And psychology teaches that by confronting our past, acknowledging our wounds, and learning to respond with compassion, we can heal and create new patterns of behavior. But David's journey was far from over. The next chapter of his story would be even more difficult. as he faced the internal struggle of change. But it was in these small moments of awareness, these first glimmers of insight, that the seeds of transformation were planted. Before we continue David's journey into the next chapter, where we begin to explore the path of healing, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on your own life. If you found this story meaningful so far, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Value Gold. In the next part, we'll explore the difficult path of change, how we can move from awareness to action, and how true healing requires courage and discipline. You won't want to miss it. Part 3, The Courage to Change. Change is never easy, especially when it feels like you're facing an insurmountable mountain. David had reached the critical moment in his journey where he had started to see the truth of his pain, but now, the real challenge lay ahead, the courage to change. For years, David had lived in a world of escape. He had numbed himself with alcohol, drugs, and unhealthy distractions, avoiding the pain that lingered deep inside. But now, that pain had become impossible to ignore. It was like an open wound, raw and bleeding. And yet, he knew that in order to heal, he had to face it head-on. This was the crossroads, where the journey of self-awareness turned into the challenge of transformation. Psychologically, this phase is often referred to as the contemplation stage in the stages of change. It's when you've come to realize that something in your life is no longer working, but the fear of actually doing something about it paralyzes you. The idea of change feels overwhelming, and the comfort of the old ways still calls out to you. But as the Buddhist teachings remind us, samsara, the cycle of suffering, will continue to repeat itself until we break free from our attachments. David was caught in this cycle, and it was only through courage that he would begin to transform. In Buddhist philosophy, change is not something that happens quickly, it's a gradual process, a continuous unfolding. The path to transformation is often paved with setbacks, moments of doubt, and deep inner resistance. David had begun to understand that healing wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. It was about moving forward one small step at a time, even when the journey felt endless. The first step for David was to confront his addiction directly. He had spent years hiding from it, denying its grip on his life. But now, he had to face the truth, he couldn't do this alone. He needed help. And so, with a mixture of humility and desperation, David made the decision to reach out for support. He joined a recovery group, began attending therapy, and started reading about mindfulness and Buddhist meditation. This was his first real act of courage. As he walked through the doors of his first recovery meeting, David was overwhelmed with emotion. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and terrified. The room was filled with people who had their own stories of struggle. People who had been where he was. They, too, had suffered. They, too, had tried to escape the darkness. But now, they were sitting together, supporting each other, sharing their stories of healing. In that moment, David realized something profound: he was not alone. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged. He wasn't the only one battling addiction. And perhaps more importantly, he wasn't the only one fighting to change. The Buddhist concept of Sangha, the community of practitioners, resonated deeply with David in that moment. In Buddhism, it's taught that one cannot walk the path of healing alone. The support of others, the presence of like-minded people who understand your struggles, is essential to overcoming obstacles. David found that the recovery group became his Sangha, a community where he could heal, grow, and learn. Psychologically, one of the most powerful forces in overcoming addiction is the sense of belonging. Many people struggle with addiction because they feel isolated, disconnected from others, or misunderstood. But in the recovery process, sharing your vulnerability, being seen for who you are, and receiving support from others can be one of the most transformative experiences. David began to experience this shift. As he started opening up to others, he realized that his shame was not something to hide, it was something to share. In sharing his story, he began to heal. The weight of his addiction began to lessen, and he felt lighter with each passing day. But even though he had taken this first courageous step, the road ahead was far from easy. The temptations still lingered. The cravings. The old patterns. The voice that said, "Just one drink. Just one hit," they were all still there. And each time David faced these temptations, he had to remember why he had started this journey in the first place. He had to remember the pain he had felt before, the emptiness that addiction had caused, and the hope he had found in the recovery group. But it wasn't enough to simply remember, he had to stay committed to the practice of mindfulness, to the practice of change. David began to incorporate daily meditation into his life, simple but powerful. At first, it was difficult. His mind was restless, full of distractions, and the old habits were hard to ignore. But as he continued, he started to notice a shift. Through mindfulness, he began to observe his thoughts without getting lost in them. He noticed the cravings arise, but instead of acting on them, he simply watched them pass by, like clouds drifting across the sky. This, David realized, was the true path to freedom, not by fighting the cravings, but by not attaching to them. This is where Buddhism and psychology converge in a beautiful way. In psychology, we understand that awareness is the first step in breaking free from addiction. But awareness alone is not enough. It must be followed by a willingness to change the habitual patterns, to create new ways of responding to discomfort, to let go of attachment. Mindfulness offers the key. It teaches us to be present with our cravings, but not to be controlled by them. In this part of David's journey, he began to experience a profound shift in his mindset. The cravings no longer had the same power over him. He could feel them, acknowledge them, and let them go. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. And as he continued to practice, he found himself more and more at peace with his journey. The road ahead was still long, and there would be setbacks. But David had made a crucial realization: he had the power to change. Before we move forward, I want you to reflect on your own life for a moment. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to make a choice, whether to stay in the comfort of old habits or to step into the unknown of change? What does the courage to change look like for you? If you found David's story inspiring so far, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Value Gold. In the next part of this journey, we will dive deeper into the process of rebuilding David's life, his challenges, and his triumphs. Change isn't just about stopping old habits, it's about creating new ways of being, new ways of living. You won't want to miss it. Stay tuned. Part 4: Rebuilding the Life. The road to recovery is never linear. It's full of peaks and valleys, moments of clarity followed by periods of doubt. For David, the path he had chosen was no different. He had taken the brave steps toward confronting his addiction. Yet now, he faced the daunting task of rebuilding his life, of learning to live without the crutch of alcohol and drugs. David's first challenge was reconnecting with the world around him. For years, addiction had kept him isolated. His friendships had withered. His family had distanced themselves. And the world felt foreign. Almost unreachable. The pain of his past was still fresh. And the shame of his addiction often made him feel like an outsider in his own life. But recovery is about more than just stopping the addiction. It's about learning to live with intention. With awareness. And with a deep sense of purpose. David had come to understand something profound in his journey so far: he couldn't change his past. But he could change his future. This realization was both freeing and terrifying. The future was wide open. But it was also unknown. And in that uncertainty, David found the raw material for transformation. Buddhism teaches that impermanence is one of the fundamental truths of existence. Everything changes. And this change is not something to fear, it is something to embrace. David's addiction had been a fixed point in his life for so long. Something he had clung to as a way to avoid the discomfort of change. But now, he was learning to embrace the ebb and flow of life. To let go of the need to control everything. And to trust that change, however difficult, would bring new opportunities for growth. The first step in rebuilding his life was repairing his relationships. He knew that healing was not just an individual journey, it required the support of others. So, David began to reach out to the people he had hurt over the years: his family, his friends, even colleagues from the past. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of regret threatened to overwhelm him. When he questioned if it was even possible to rebuild trust. But, just as he had learned to sit with his own discomfort through mindfulness, he learned to sit with the discomfort of others. It was in these moments of vulnerability, of honest communication, that the seeds of healing were planted. Psychologically, this part of recovery is often the most challenging. Rebuilding relationships requires a deep level of self-compassion and forgiveness, for oneself and others. For years, David had seen himself through the lens of his addiction. Believing that he was unworthy of love. Unworthy of forgiveness. But as he practiced mindfulness, he began to see that he was not defined by his past mistakes. He was defined by his ability to grow. To learn. And to change. This shift in perception was crucial for his healing process. He wasn't a broken person, he was a person who had suffered. Who had learned. And who was now on the path to wholeness. One of the most profound aspects of recovery is the need to replace old, harmful habits with new, healthier ones. David began to find solace in meditation. Spending more time in stillness and reflection. He also started exploring new passions. Hobbies that he had long neglected. He rediscovered his love for music. Began writing in a journal. And spent time in nature. Soaking in the peace and serenity that had once eluded him. These small, seemingly simple activities began to fill the void that had once been occupied by addiction. They provided him with the tools to stay grounded. To reconnect with his true self. And to navigate the world without the need for substances. Buddhism teaches that healing is not just about fixing what's broken, it's about coming into alignment with your true nature. In David's case, this meant finding joy in the simple things. Reconnecting with the present moment. And letting go of the past. It was a reminder that the path to healing is not about perfection, it's about progress. One of the most powerful moments in David's journey came when he finally realized that his life had meaning. That his suffering had purpose. He wasn't just recovering for himself, he was recovering so that he could help others. The community of people who had supported him on his journey had become his inspiration. And he wanted to give back. He began volunteering at local support groups. Sharing his story with others who were just beginning their own journeys. In doing so, he found a sense of purpose that he had never known before. Psychologically, Finding a sense of purpose is one of the most important factors in sustaining long-term recovery. Having a reason to get up in the morning, having a way to contribute to the world, can be the difference between relapse and recovery. David had found that purpose, and it gave him the strength to keep moving forward, even when the road felt uncertain. As David continued on his path, he also began to embrace the deeper teachings of Buddhism, the concepts of non-attachment and equanimity. He learned to accept life as it was, with all its imperfections, its joys and sorrows. He began to see that everything in life, whether good or bad, was impermanent. This understanding gave him the freedom to let go of the need to control, to let go of the anxiety that came from constantly fearing the future. He could trust that whatever happened, he would be able to handle it, because he was no longer attached to the outcomes. He was simply living each moment with awareness, with presence. David's journey was far from over. The challenges would continue. But he had discovered something priceless along the way, the strength to face them with courage, compassion, and mindfulness. He had rebuilt his life from the ground up. And although the road ahead remained uncertain, he knew one thing for sure: he was no longer defined by his addiction. He was defined by his ability to transform, to heal, and to embrace the fullness of life. Before we move on to the final part of David's story, I want to ask you this: what is the most important lesson you've learned so far in this journey? How can you apply the teachings of mindfulness, compassion, and non-attachment to your own life? If you've been moved by David's story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Value Gold. In the final part of this journey, we'll explore the final steps of David's transformation, how he finds lasting peace and purpose, and how you can too. This is a journey you won't want to miss. So stay with us until the end. Part 5: Finding Lasting Peace and Purpose. The journey was not easy, and it never would be. But David had come a long way since that first step toward recovery. He had battled his addiction, rebuilt his relationships, and discovered a new sense of purpose. Now, in this final part of his story, he would face the most profound challenge of all: finding lasting peace and the courage to live in harmony with his true self. David had learned that healing wasn't just about overcoming the past. It was about creating a life that was grounded in presence, mindfulness, and compassion. It was about learning to live without attachment to outcomes, without the need for validation or approval from the outside world. He had spent so much of his life searching for meaning, searching for fulfillment in all the wrong places. But now, he realized that true peace came not from external circumstances, but from within. Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes from letting go of the things that bind us: our fears, our attachments, our desires. David had spent so much of his life chasing external sources of happiness: the next drink, the next high, the next fleeting pleasure. But now, he understood that the true source of happiness lay in simply being present, in embracing the impermanence of life, and in accepting himself exactly as he was. In the quiet moments of meditation, David began to experience a profound sense of peace, a peace that had always been there, buried beneath the noise of his addiction and the chaos of his past. It was a peace that came from the realization that he didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to control everything. He simply needed to be. This is the essence of mindfulness, the ability to live fully in the present moment, without judgment or resistance. It was through this practice that David found his truest self. And it was through this practice that he began to experience the freedom he had been searching for all his life. But peace wasn't just an internal state, it was reflected in his external life as well. David had spent years building walls around himself, pushing people away, and avoiding vulnerability. But now, he was learning to connect with others in a way that was deep and authentic. He had reconciled with his family, rekindled friendships, and was beginning to see the world with new eyes. He no longer viewed his past as a source of shame. Instead, he saw it as part of his journey, a journey that had led him to this moment of profound transformation. David's story was not just about overcoming addiction. It was about becoming who he was always meant to be, a person of compassion, of mindfulness, and of purpose. His story had come full circle. The boy who had once been lost in darkness was now standing in the light, ready to share his light with others. As he continued to walk his path, David became increasingly aware of his role in the world. He knew that he had been given a second chance. Not just for himself, but for others as well. He wanted to be a beacon of hope for those still struggling, to show them that transformation was possible, no matter how hopeless things might seem. He began to speak at recovery centers, sharing his story with others who were in the early stages of their own journeys. Through these acts of service, David found that the true healing came not just from his own growth, but from the act of helping others heal as well. Psychologically, this is one of the most powerful aspects of recovery, finding meaning and purpose beyond yourself. When you can look beyond your own suffering and see the potential to help others, it gives your life a deeper sense of significance. This is where true peace resides, not in escaping the pain, but in using it to serve the world, to bring light to others in their darkness. David's story is a testament to the power of transformation, to the incredible strength that lies within all of us to overcome our struggles, to heal our wounds, and to live a life of meaning and purpose. It shows us that no matter how far we may have fallen, we always have the power to rise again. And in that rising, we find not just healing, but freedom. So, as you reflect on David's journey, I ask you, what steps can you take today to move closer to the life you desire? How can you let go of the things that are holding you back? What would it look like to embrace your own transformation, to live with purpose, and to find peace within? If you've been inspired by David's journey and the powerful lessons shared, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Value Gold, and share it with anyone who might need a reminder that change is possible. Your support helps us continue to create content that inspires and uplifts others on their own path of transformation. We've come to the end of David's story, but this is just the beginning of your own journey. In our next video, we'll explore more stories of personal growth, spiritual wisdom, and practical steps to create lasting change. Don't miss out. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next transformative video. Thank you for being a part of the Value Gold community. Stay inspired, stay mindful, and always remember, the power to change is within you. Goodbye. And until next time.